What you are about to witness is the most epic battle of World War II, caught on film. On March 6, 1945, in the rubble of Cologne's shattered streets, two tanks faced off, a German Panther and an American Pershing. The city's iconic cathedral loomed in the background, while war reporters risked their lives to capture every second on film. These images became some of the most recognizable footage of World War II. But behind the spectacle was a costly mistake that doomed the German crew, and a tragedy that touched civilians like 10-year-old 𝐬𝐿𝐫𝐫, whose loss of innocence has gone untold until now. To understand how this battle unfolded, we need to look at what made the Pershing tank such a game changer in the first place. For American tank crews in early 1945, the arrival of the M26 Pershing was more than just a new vehicle. It was a lifeline. Facing off against German Panthers and Tigers had become a grim routine. The M4 Sherman, the mainstay of U.S. armored forces, was dependable, but simply couldn't keep up with the German heavyweights. Even with the later upgrade to a 76mm gun, Shermans still struggled to penetrate the thick front armor of a Panther. And their own armor was no match for the German 88mm. Tank crews knew the odds. Half of all tankers became casualties, and for commanders, the risk was closer to 40%. Something had to tip the balance. The Pershing was designed as that answer. At 46 tons, it was heavier than the Sherman and boasted 102mm of frontal armor, enough to give its crew a real sense of protection for the first time. Its 90mm gun could finally take on a Panther head-to-head, even from the front. This wasn't just a technical upgrade, it was a psychological one. American crews had been waiting for a tank that could give them a fair shot, and now they had it. But the Pershing's impact was limited by timing. By the time it was ready, the war in Europe was already winding down. Only about 20 Pershings made it to the front lines in time for combat testing. Each one was essentially a prototype, and just 5 crews were chosen to put them to the test under fire. The pressure was real. These few tanks had to prove not just their own worth, but whether the whole program had been worth the effort and delay. One of those crews included Clarence Smoyer, a 19-year-old gunner from Pennsylvania. He and his team found themselves leading the American advance into Cologne on March 5, 1945. Their objective was the city's cathedral, a massive structure still standing amid the devastation. The streets ahead were choked with rubble, barely passable, and every intersection could hide a threat. The Pershing rolled forward at the head of the column, with war reporters close behind, cameras ready to capture every moment. Smoyer and his crew knew they were part of something bigger than themselves, but the sense of being watched didn't make the job any easier. For these tankers, every decision mattered. The Pershing's presence was supposed to be a statement. The Allies could now match German armor, not just in numbers, but in technology. Still, for the men inside, the stakes weren't about proving a point. They were about survival. The cathedral loomed over everything, a constant landmark as the Pershing inched through the city's ruins. The advance was slow, tense, and unpredictable. The crew never knew what might be waiting around the next corner. As the Pershing approached the heart of Cologne, it wasn't just the American crew under pressure. Across the rubble-strewn streets, another tank crew was watching and waiting, ready to make a decision that would determine who survived the day. Wilhelm Bartelborth, commanding the Panther near Cologne Cathedral, was no stranger to tank battles. He had a reputation, 50 Allied tanks to his name, according to some records, which made him one of the more formidable German commanders left in the city. But by March 6, 1945, even veterans like Bartelborth were working with what they had. A crew made up of both seasoned fighters and young recruits, like the 18-year-old gunner, Gustav Schäfer. The Panther, with its heavy armor, was a force on open ground, but in the tight, ruined streets of Cologne, that armor became less of an asset. The city itself was unrecognizable, reduced to heaps of debris and hollowed-out buildings by months of bombing. The German defenders knew they were outmatched. Their mission was to slow the Americans, not stop them. Every minute counted, and their position near the cathedral was chosen for its defensive potential. The nearby railway tunnel offered cover, and an escape route if things fell apart. But the plan was to hold their ground as long as possible. The Panther's gun was already set on the street, ready for anything that came into view. Then the American Pershing appeared. Here's where the fatal mistake happened. As the Pershing moved into their line of sight, Bartelborth, seeing the unfamiliar silhouette and under the pressure of the moment, ordered his gunner to stand down. He mistook the Pershing for a friendly vehicle, an error that, in the chaos and smoke of urban combat, was not as unlikely as it might sound. This wasn't just hesitation. It was a misidentification at the worst possible time. While Bartelborth's order delayed their shot, the Pershing's gunner, 𝐿 didn't wait. At a distance of about 110 meters, the Pershing's 90mm round struck the side of the Panther's hull. Right where the ammunition was stored. The result was instant. Flames erupted from the tank, igniting the ammunition and turning the inside into an inferno. The video footage from that day shows the aftermath in stark detail. The crew scrambled to escape as fire engulfed the Panther. Bartelborth and the driver, 𝐼𝐻, managed to get out through the hatches and were quickly captured. At least one other crew member escaped, but two likely perished in the flames, trapped by the violence of the explosion and the speed at which the fire spread. For the survivors, it was a narrow escape from a situation that had shifted in seconds. With the Panther out of action, the Pershing now had a clear path to advance on the cathedral, removing one of the last major threats to the American push into the heart of the city. The psychological blow was immediate. The Panther, once the pride of German armored forces, had been destroyed not by a familiar Sherman, but by a new and superior American tank. For Bartelborth, the error was devastating. A single command that cost his crew dearly and marked the collapse of the last organized German resistance around the cathedral. But the battle's consequences didn't stop at military losses. As tanks exchanged fire and buildings burned, the people living in Cologne faced dangers they couldn't control or predict. The chaos of war didn't just decide the fate of soldiers. It swept up anyone unlucky enough to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. For the people still living in Cologne, the battle wasn't just something happening on the streets. It was happening right outside their doors, sometimes right in front of them. The forgotten civilians of Cologne found themselves in the crosshairs as the city became a battlefield, and their stories show what it really meant to survive in a place where war left no safe harbor. On March 5, 1945, Michael Delling, a grocer, and his 27-year-old employee, Katharina Esser, tried to escape the fighting by car. They didn't know that they were about to drive straight into a deadly crossfire between an American Pershing tank and a German Panzer IV. With nerves already frayed and the city's ruins making every movement suspect, both tank crews mistook Delling's vehicle for a threat. The Pershing's gunner, 𝐿 fired its coaxial machine gun, while the Panzer C4 also opened up. In a matter of seconds, the car was riddled with bullets. Delling died instantly. Esser was pulled from the wreckage by American medics, but even with their help, her injuries were too severe. She held on for a short time, but eventually succumbed to her wounds. Her story, and the loss of her life at just 27, is a stark reminder of how quickly the lives of ordinary people could be erased by decisions made in the fog of battle. Not every civilian story ended in tragedy, but none escaped untouched. From her apartment balcony, 10-year-old Ingeborg Rau watched the tanks and soldiers move through the streets below. She remembered the sharp crack of gunfire, the rumble of engines, and her mother's urgent call, "Rentrez tout de suite, come inside immediately." Rau later spoke about how seeing tanks from above and witnessing the violence so directly shaped her memories of the war for years. She described the constant fear, the way every noise could mean danger, and how even after the Americans took over her family's apartment, the sense of uncertainty never really left. For Ingeborg, the battle wasn't just one day. It became a part of her childhood that she carried long after the city was quiet again. Cologne itself was already battered before the tanks ever rolled in. After 262 air raids and nearly 20,000 bombing deaths, Cologne was already a city of ghosts before this tank duel unfolded. The cathedral still stood, battered but not broken, a rare landmark in a city that had been reduced to ruins. Food was scarce, families were separated, and hope was in short supply. The war had stripped away almost everything that made daily life feel normal. When German engineers blew up the Hohenzollern Bridge, it wasn't just a military move. It sealed off one of the last ways out, trapping anyone still on the West Bank. The destruction of the bridge left survivors with nowhere to run, tightening the sense of isolation and fear that already hung over the city. For many, this act made it clear that escape was no longer possible. They would have to endure whatever came next. In the end, the stories of people like Delling, Esser, and Rao remind us that the real cost of battles like Cologne's isn't just measured in tanks destroyed or territory gained. It's in the moments that never make it into the official histories, the split-second choices, the losses that ripple through families, and the memories that never fade. And sometimes, the only reason we know what happened at all is because someone was there to capture it. The Cologne tank battle stands out not just for its drama, but for how a single misidentification by Bartelborth changed everything. That one order to hold fire didn't just seal the fate of the Panther crew. It set off a chain of events that cost civilian lives and shaped the outcome of the battle. It's a stark reminder of how, in war, split-second decisions can have consequences far beyond the battlefield. The footage captured by combat cameramen gave us a rare, detailed look at these moments, but it's worth remembering that even the best film can't show everything. Sometimes the camera misses key details, or the way scenes are staged shapes our understanding more than we realize. If you found something in this story that surprised you, maybe the role of the cameramen, the fate of the civilians, or the reunion between former enemies, let me know in the comments. I'm interested to hear what stood out most to you.